Morning, all. All right, so we're starting things off today looking at the 1983-1984 season. Yep. 1984 was a great year. Personally, I felt it was a great year. I loved the music, the movies, the TV shows. I love the hockey, too. This is really where I was starting to love getting any hockey collectibles I could, tons of hockey cards, all that fun stuff. And got really into Minnesota North Stars, Vancouver Canucks, and soon the Boston Bruins as well. So for Boston, they finished first in the division that year. That division being the Adams. They go 49-25-6 under coach Jerry Cheevers. 104 points, 336 goals scored, 261 goals against. The Buffalo Sabres go 48-25-7, so they finish 1 point back of Boston, 103 points. And if they'd passed Boston, we would have had Buffalo and Montreal in the first round. Scotty Bowman against his former team could have been great. 315 goals scored, 257 goals against. Michel Bergeron, 42-28-10 record, 94 points, 360 goals scored, 278 goals against under coach Michel Bergeron. Le Petit Tigre, right? Yeah. That's what he was known as. And the Battle of Quebec would end up being a big deal that year. So for Montreal, they finished 35-40-5, 75 points, 286 goals scored, 295 goals against. Bob Berry coaches them to a record of 28-30-5, and then Jacques Lemaire comes in and coaches them to a 7-10 record. And of course, Jacques Lemaire would be best known for coaching other teams at a later date, but he coaches Montreal here. Hartford, rough year for Hartford again, 66 points, record of 28-42-10 under coach Larry Plow, 288 goals scored, 320 goals against. The Patrick Division is won by the New York Islanders, so this is a team that's got to be exhausted from 4 straight Stanley Cups. But they get a 50-26-4 record, 104 points under coach Al Arbor, 357 goals scored, 269 goals against. Brian Murray, who he and Terry Murray being in the same organization, that was a first that two brothers are coaching and in management of the same team. But Brian Murray coaches the Caps to a 48-27-5 record, 101 points, 308 goals scored, 226 goals against. Philadelphia under coach Bob McCammon, the last year before Mike Keenan comes in. The Flyers finished with 98 points, record of 44-26-10, 350 goals scored, 290 goals against. Herb Brooks with the Rangers, 42-29-9, 93 points, 314 goals scored, 304 goals against. The New Jersey Devils and the Pittsburgh Penguins had themselves a turtle derby that year. The winner, which would mean the team that loses the most, ends up getting Mario Lemieux. New Jersey just didn't lose enough. The only time you can say that during the 80s for the New Jersey Devils. 17-56-7 record, 41 points, 231 goals scored, 350 goals against. Under coach Bill McMillan, they started 2-18, and then under Tom McVie, they went 15-38-7. The Pittsburgh Penguins, who were admonished when they won, 16-58-6 record, 38 points, 254 goals scored, 390 goals against. They were coached by Lou Angotti, although I feel bad for Lou because when the team did well, like I said, things didn't go well for him. They weren't happy when they won because they wanted Mario Lemieux. This is a team that at this point in time looks like they're not going to be long for Pittsburgh. And they know that Mario Lemieux is seen as that next star, as the next Wayne Gretzky, and they need that player in their organization. Not that New Jersey didn't either. New Jersey's already having financial troubles too. So we go out west now, and in the north, Glenn Sonmore, still the coach in Minnesota. They finished with 88 points, record of 39-31-10, 345 goals scored, 344 goals against. St. Louis finished the second with 71 points, record of 32-41-7, 293 goals scored, 316 goals against, under coach Jacques Demers. The Detroit Red Wings under coach Nick Polano finished 31-42-7 for 70 points. 298 goals scored, 323 goals against. I'm doing the math on that. That's 69 points. Must have just wrote that down wrong. That's 69 points. I just changed that. All right. At 30-42-8 with 68 points, the Chicago Blackhawks, 277 goals scored, 311 goals against under coach Orville Tessier. The Toronto Maple Leafs missed the playoffs. 61 points, record of 26-45-9 under coach Mike Nikolak. 303 goals scored, 387 goals against. Then we go to the Smythe Division. The Edmonton Oilers easily win the West, easily win their division as well with 419 points. 57-18-5 record under coach Glenn Sather. 446 goals scored, 314 goals against. There was a cool, calm demeanor, too, with Sather behind the bench most of the time. I just remember him kind of with the coiffed hair, the feathered hair, chewing his gum all the time. And, the Oilers were a lot of fun to watch at that point. The 446 goals scored, that was a lot. Calgary second in the division with 82 points under coach Badger Bob Johnson. 34-32-14 record, 311 goals scored, 314 goals against. The Vancouver Canucks struggling because it's what they do. 32-49-9 record for 73 points, 305 goals scored, 328 goals against. Roger Nielsen, a record of 17-26-5. Harry Neal lets him go and takes over behind the bench. So he was GM and coach at that point, 15-13-4. And as I've said before, I liked Harry Neal as the GM of the Canucks. I'm not sure there's much he could have done to make this team much better than what they were in a division with the Edmonton Oilers. The Winnipeg Jets also finished with 73 points, but they have one less win than Vancouver, so they finished fourth with a record of 31-38-11. 340 goals scored, 374 goals against. Tom Watt finishes 6-13-2 before they get rid of him. Barry Long comes in and coaches the team to a record of 25-25-9 after taking over. The LA Kings go through three coaches of sorts. 23-44-13 record for 59 points. 309 goals scored, 376 goals against. Don Perry, coaching record of 14-27-9. Rogie Vachon takes over in an interim role for a 1-0-1 record. And then Roger Nielsen, a record of 8-17-3. Roger Nielsen coached a number of teams in the NHL. I'm thinking he coached Philadelphia at some point as well, because I know he coached Toronto, Vancouver, and obviously LA. I think he was in Philadelphia too. Yeah, he was around a lot. The 5-minute overtime gets added to the league, so that means that, if it's tied after 60 minutes, you play the 5-minute overtime. If it's still tied at that point, you get the 1 point and you go home. Overtime had been removed in 1942 due to travel restrictions around the Second World War. The Oilers, 446 goals that season, sets a new record. They broke their own record, which I think broke their own record the year before as well. It's an absolutely crazy year for goal scoring in the NHL. And Paul Coffey benefits from that too. He has what's the best offensive season for a defenseman since Bobby Orr. But the big debate with him was he doesn't play defense like Orr did. Orr was a great, complete, all-around defenseman, whereas Paul Coffey was seen as being kind of a fourth forward for the Oilers. And that's a debate that rages on to this day about his role as a defenseman and as a rover, but we used to just feel bad for Kevin Lowe because he'd be paired with Coffey, and covering for Coffey, I would imagine, was sometimes a nightmare. The Oilers also were the first team in the NHL's history to have 350 goal scorers in the same season. Just absolutely ridiculous. Steve Penny becomes a story that season, too. He goes on a bit of a run with the Montreal Canadiens in the playoffs. How? Well, they play Boston in the first round, which is a bad matchup for Boston, and then he just keeps going from there. But Steve Penny was seen as maybe the next Ken Dryden. I remember being excited to get his rookie card and all that, and then, it didn't quite work out for him beyond that, but still, you have that run to remember. Makes him for a really nice memory. July 6th of 1983, the Boston Bruins signed Jeff Courtnall as an undrafted free agent. He's better known, of course, as playing for St. Louis and Vancouver, but he started out in Boston. October 18th of 1983, the Kings make a rather one-sided trade as they trade Larry Murphy, future Hall of Famer, to the Washington Capitals in exchange for Brian Engblom and Ken Houston. Now, Engblom, perfectly serviceable player. Ken Houston had a couple of good years there in Washington, sure, but Larry Murphy is Larry Murphy. January 4th of 1984, the Oilers and the North Stars set a modern-day hockey record in terms of goals scored in a game with 20 of them. Combined 20 goals and a 12-8 win for the Oilers. Not the best defensive game, but, highly entertaining, right? January 27th of 1984, Wayne Gretzky gets a record of 51 straight games with a point with that one. He ended up recording 61 goals, 92 assists, 153 points during that 50-game streak. So he would have led the league in points just based on that streak alone. That's it. And that's it. October 23rd of 1983, Rich Sutter is the sixth and final member of the Sutter clan, all of them brothers, to record a goal in the National Hockey League. Now, of course, some of their offspring have recorded goals since then, but it's an NHL record to have six brothers I do wonder, like, the Sutters have to be the family with the most family members to have scored goals at the NHL level. It's absolutely insane. January 23rd of 1984, the Sabres become the first team to win 10 in a row on the road. Pretty solid record right there for the Buffalo Sabres. That record has been surpassed since then, but still, there it is. April 8th of 1984, Paul Reinhart has a hat trick in a playoff game against the Canucks. He becomes the first defenseman in NHL history to record 2 playoff hat tricks. He had done that against the Edmonton Oilers the previous year, which oddly enough was the only game where somebody on each team had a hat trick in a playoff game at that stage. This was also the season after the St. Louis Blues tried to move to Saskatoon. It was the summer of '83 that plan was put in place, and the NHL said, "You want to go where? No, we're not going to Saskatoon." The Art Ross Trophy went to Gretzky that year. The Masterton goes to Brad Park of the Detroit Red Wings. The Calder goes to Tom Barrasso of the Buffalo Sabres. He was an absolute sensation that year. The Conn Smythe goes to Mark Messier of the Edmonton Oilers. The Selke goes to Doug Jarvis of the Washington Capitals. The Hart Trophy goes to Wayne Gretzky of the Edmonton Oilers. The Jack Adams goes to Brian Murray of the Washington Capitals. The Norris goes to Rod Langway of the Washington Capitals. So David Poile takes over, and the Capitals are suddenly winning a bunch of awards. They're up near the top, but they just can't quite get over the hump in the playoffs, was going to be the story throughout the 80s after that. The Lady Byng went to Mike Bossy of the Islanders. The Lester Pearson goes to Wayne Gretzky of course, the Edmonton Oilers. The Vezina goes to Tom Barrasso of the Buffalo Sabres. The Jennings, for goals against average, goes to Al Jensen and Pat Riggin in Washington. The All-Stars in the NHL that year, down the middle, Wayne Gretzky's the first team All-Star because, of course, he is, for the Oilers. Brian Trottier for the Islanders, second team. On the left side, Michel Goulet of Quebec, first team All-Star, and Mark Messier, the Oilers, second team All-Star. On the right side, Mike Bossy of the Islanders, first team All-Star. Yeri Curry of the Oilers, second team All-Star. On defense, Larry Langway. Sure, why not? We'll make up a brother. Rod Langway of the Washington Capitals, first team alongside Ray Bourque of the Boston Bruins. Paul Coffey of the Oilers, second team All-Star alongside Denny Potvin of the New York Islanders. In goal, Tom Barrasso of Buffalo, first team All-Star, and Pat Riggin of the Washington Capitals, second team All-Star. So Wayne Gretzky wins the scoring race by a lot. 74 games, 87 goals, 118 assists, 205 points. But he's slipping. That 118 assists would have left him fourth in scoring in the NHL. Paul Coffey, 80 games, 40 goals, 86 assists, 126 points. Fantastic year. Michel Goulet of Quebec, 75 games, 56 goals, 65 assists, 121 points. I should mention as well, Gretzky missing 6 games that year. The Oilers were not the same without Gretzky, and that was where everybody kind of jumped on the, hey, if they don't have Gretzky, they're no good. Which, I mean, he had 205 points, so he was kind of propping him up a bit. Peter Stastny in Quebec, not Paul Stastny, he's a generation away. But 80 games for Peter Stastny, 46 goals, 73 assists, 119 points. Mike Bossy with the Islanders, 67 games, 51 goals, 67 assists, 118 points. Barry Peterson in Boston, 80 games, 39 goals, 77 assists, 116 points. Easy for me to say. But again, Barry Peterson, 116 points. He had over 100 the year before. Vancouver thought that's what they were getting when they traded for him. And honestly, I'm going to say this too, Peterson had a couple of good years in Vancouver when he got there. Just that Cam Neely guy. Yeri Curry in Edmonton, 64 games, 52 goals, 61 assists, 113 points. Brian Trottier with the Islanders, 68 games, 40 goals, 71 assists, 111 points. Bernie Federko in St. Louis, 79 games, 41 goals, 66 assists, 107 points. And Rick Middleton in Boston, 80 games, 47 goals, 58 assists, 105 points. Grant Fuhr has a bit of a coming out party that year, and that would continue once we got to the playoffs. But Fuhr, 30, 10-4 record, 3.91 goals against average, 1 shutout. Dan Bouchard in Quebec, 29, 18-8 record, 3.21 goals against average, 1 shutout. Pete Peters in Boston, 29, 16-2 record, 3.16 goals against, no shutouts, because he had the 8 a year before that, so he used up all his shutouts. Froze in Philadelphia, 28, 13-7 record, 3.15 goals against, 2 shutouts. That's the thing. We called him Froze. It was Froze. And now it's Phrase. I don't know, maybe we were all mispronouncing it back then. I apologize. Glenn Hanlon, New York Rangers, 28-14-4 record, 3.52 goals against, 1 shutout. Full disclosure, I was kind of mad when Glenn Hanlon got traded by the Canucks. I thought having Hanlon and Brodeur was a pretty good tandem, but they opted to keep Brodeur and got rid of Hanlon. Andy Moog in Edmonton, 27-8-1 record, 3.78 goals against, average, 1 shutout. I was a big Moog fan, of course. And then we get to the playoffs. In the division semifinals, this is still best 3 out of 5. Calgary beats Vancouver 3-1 because it's a bad matchup for the Canucks. Edmonton sweeps Winnipeg in 3 straight for the second straight year. St. Louis beats Detroit 3-1. Minnesota beats Chicago 3-2 in a bit of a thriller. Washington beats Philadelphia 3 games straight. The Islanders beat the Rangers 3-2, so the 1940 chants can continue. Quebec sweeps Buffalo 3 straight, and Montreal sweeps Boston 3 straight. So the Quebec teams knock out the American teams 1 and 2 there. The Adams division, some nice upsets, and sets up a really good series in the next round. So in the division finals, Edmonton beats Calgary 4-3, and this is where it really becomes the Battle of Alberta. Finally, Calgary looks like they can keep up with the Oilers, and maybe, just maybe, they'll be able to beat them someday. We do know that happened, of course. Minnesota beat St. Louis in a thriller of a 7-game series. The Islanders beat Washington 4-1. Montreal beats Quebec 4-2 in that 1984 division final. Now we get to the conference finals. Edmonton makes quick work of the Minnesota North Stars. Sadly for me as a North Stars fan. 7-1 and 4-3 respectively. Edmonton then goes into Minnesota after winning those 2 at home, and they win 8-5 and 3-1 to win the series 4 games straight. The Islanders, they have the energy to get to another Stanley Cup final and setting a record again for how many series in a row one team can win. Montreal wins the first 2 games against the Islanders in that series by scores of 3-0 and 4-2. So it looks like it's going to be Montreal and Edmonton in the final, but the Islanders, they have other plans. They win at home 5-2 and 3-1. They go into Montreal and win 3-1. They come home and win 4-1 to win the series in 6. The Oilers had been stewing on what had happened the year before that entire year. They had learned a lot about how to win from the New York Islanders, and they showed that in the rematch in the 1984 final. Edmonton wins in New York 1-0, and that's huge that they win that game, they get that shutout, and just show we can play defense if we need to. The Islanders win the second game 6-1, so looks like maybe the Islanders are going to do it again, but the Oilers, they do bounce back. Games 3 and 4 at home, they win both of them by scores of 7-2, and then they win Game 5 by a score of 5-2 to win the series 4-1. In that Stanley Cup final, Gretzky, who had 4 assists in the final the year before, he has 4 goals and 3 assists in this final to silence the doubters. Jari Kurri, a goal and 5 assists. Mark Messier, 3 goals and an assist. Paul Coffey, 2 goals, 2 assists. Kevin McClelland also had 2 goals, 2 assists. And Glenn Anderson, a goal and 3 assists for him in that final. Grant Fuhr, 904 save percentage. Andy Moog, 915 save percentage. They share the net. They both get a Stanley Cup ring out of it. On the Islanders side, Clark Gillies, 5 goals, 3 assists, 8 points. So he had some energy left at the end of this. Trottier, 2 goals, 2 assists. Pat Flatley, a goal and 3 assists. And Pat LaFontaine, 2 goals and an assist. And I remember when Flatley and LaFontaine came in, I was thinking, so the Islanders, this dynasty could go on forever if they can keep finding players like this. Because LaFontaine we knew was special from the start, and Flatley looked like he had a lot of upside too. Brent Sutter, a goal and 2 assists, and Mike Bossy, 3 assists in that final. Billy Smith, 878 save percentage in the final, and Rolly Melanson got in there too, had an 870 save percentage in his appearances in said Stanley Cup final. So there you go, the 1983-1984 season. We'll do 84-85 tomorrow. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you've not done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.